Hello and welcome to my brand new sets of brush sets, I have to say. These are called InBloom and they comprise of two brush sets. One of them is called Drop and Bloom and the other is InBloom. I will take you through all of these brushes to show you what they can do. A couple of things first. Very first disclaimer, I'm still an artist, not a YouTuber, so expect all sorts of funny little bloopers. And if you're looking for my succulents that I got for the last video, I killed them, so no more succulents, I'm afraid. But you're here for the brushes, I suppose, so let's have a look at them. A couple of things first. Before you work with any of my brushes, it's a good idea to set your canvas to something like this. So you have something like 6,000 by 4,500 pixels. That's a great size for all of these brushes. That's the size I use them at. And if you work a lot smaller or a lot larger, you may have to adjust some of these brushes. So this is an ideal sort of setup for these brushes. Another very important setup is the pressure curve. If you already know my brushes, you know that as well. You find the pressure curve by hitting the wrench icon and then going to preferences and then hitting pressure and smoothing. Normally the pressure curve here goes from lower left straight to upper right in one diagonal, and you can see that my pressure curve here clings to the lower, the upper left-hand corner. So that means that these brushes will behave very nicely with very little pressure. That's good for the versatility of the brushes, and it's also very good for your hand and give yourself some rest, especially those parts of your hand anatomy that are responsible for applying a lot of pressure. So we will begin with my grunge texture, which is also part of the pack that you have. It's comprised of a highlights layer, a texture and white layer, and the texture layer proper called grunge, which you may know from some of my other texture layers. I will hide these again and we will use the paint here bit to paint. Let's start with the InBloom set. The InBloom set is arranged, as all of my brush sets are, in the same manner. So you start with sketching and inking brushes, then you have a lot of very handy multi-purpose painting brushes for all sorts of different things. Then come a couple of dark edges and liners, so for the more detailed stuff and glazing. Then we have a lot of very, very much fun stuff that we're going to look into at greater detail later. And then we have a couple of smudging and blending brushes. I made 5 new ones for this set. 3 erasers. One is my favorite pencil eraser, which goes into every set I make because I love it so much. And all the others are pretty simple as well, but you may find them useful. And we end with quite a lot of paper brushes, which are very useful if you do not have a texture layer in place like we do now. So at the end, I will show you what to do with these. Let's start with the sketching brushes. I made this sketch to finish dark tilt, which is something that I find very handy. If you want to just sketch something, you can use it very lightly. That's cat hair, wait. Be gone, cat hair. So you can use it very lightly, applying just a little pressure and get something like very, very faint pencil lines. If you use more pressure, these lines get darker, but not significantly broader. You can make them broader by tilting your Apple pencil, and then you have the full range of dark and broad. So with the same brush tool here, you can really do some very light sketching, and then without changing your tool. You have the possibility to just do your darker lines or whatever. Then we have a couple of liners, two more liners. One I call the Art Nouveau liner, because that's something that Alphonse Mucha uses quite a lot in his sketches, in his finished works, of course. So you have this sort of very even looking liner where you can vary your pressure. A lot of pressure makes the lines quite dark and quite broad, and a little pressure just means very, very light and tiny lines. So you have a great lot of versatility within this one brush here as well. The last one in the set is a very scratchy liner, which is great for very expressive inking. That looks very dramatic now, but if you use it at smaller sizes, it's hardly noticeable that it's this very rough one, but it really will result in very interesting lines when you use that. And let's have a look at these painting brushes here. Let's go for a lighter color there. That is the first one that I included because it's so versatile for big background things. This is the Deluge one, so you can cover large areas with this. It works like a wet into wet brush, so you have no dark edges when you pick up your Apple pencil and then drop in another one. So that one works great for covering great background areas. To show you the grunge texture, by the way, if I turn it off, you can see that this Deluge brush is really very, very even and doesn't have a lot of texture to it. So here you absolutely need a texture in place to make it look a lot more like watercolor. The next Deluge, let's have both side by side. Let's do the fuzzy one here and the textured one next to it. Has a bit more texture to it all on its own. So they work for different sorts of background work. Here we have the detail brush. It doesn't stack a lot, and it's great for just adding tiny detail to something that you have already in place. The fuzzy detail brush works a lot like the other one, so it also doesn't stack a lot when you use it. Let's use a more interesting color. And it's easy to add detail. This one is opaque, so it does not glaze. The glazing brushes are further down. So this actually works a bit more like gouache than watercolor would. Here we have the wash and blend brush. Let's just leave that in place so I can show you what that does, because you can now blend two colors together with this. And if we go back to the yellow one, if you apply just a bit of pressure, you can blend two colors into each other. And this one I'm very proud of. It's a broken wash brush that I made from a texture that I painted. So what you have, hello, okay, is this. You can see these bits of broken paper that is left standing where the color didn't catch. If you use it as a very large background brush, you will notice that the pattern starts repeating. This is the same as this, that is the same as that, and so on. If you want to avoid this, there's a handy little trick that you can use. Use one of the bits where you have no repetition, and then with two fingers, just turn your canvas just a little. By doing that, you will have no repetition. This goes for a couple of these brushes, by the way, which comes in very handy for all these texture heavy brushes that I have. This one adds a lot of general texture. We don't really have any pattern repeating, which is nice. So you can just use that to add texture to anything you want. Also, if you have something like a very plain background like this, you can use the general text in a darker color, for example, to just add a bit of interest. And that is very easy to see. When I turn off the grunge texture background, you can see that here the texture remains even without the background. The next one is similar. It's a bit more flaky. Also works well for backgrounds. It's quite large, so you don't have that much repeating, but you can see again, you have a bit of repetition there. So again, if you don't want that, turn your canvas and fool the eye. And now this doesn't look like any repetition at all. So the next one is 3 brushes built on the same principles, but some are more pronounced and others are smaller and bigger. Let's use that at the recommended size so you can see what it does. We have a flaky, a little salty texture. The next one is similar. It's just larger. And the last one looks a bit like squall, I think. so it's a bit more pronounced. You can see that all of these have a little color variation built in. That's something that I like to do with all my brushes. If that absolutely irks you and you hate the color variation, I can show you how to turn it off. That goes for every brush. You tap on the brush, you go to color dynamics, you see the hue set to 3% here, you set it to 0, and then you will have no color variation at all, but I like to keep mine at 3. Done and done. So these are soft and salty large, and the squally texture. Then the next one is another texture background thing. If you use a larger one, you can see a very, very faint sort of pattern repetition. Again and again, the same thing that I showed you for the other ones goes for this one as well. It works better for some than it does for others. I think this one works really well to avoid the pattern repetition. So and suddenly you have a very nice random sort of background for your watercolor painting. This one is similar than the last one, but it's even softer. This one does have next to no repetition because some of the parameters are different, so you can really go to work on any backgrounds to your heart's delight and not worry about any pattern repetition for this one. The next one is great for layering. So you can lay down a layer and then go over it again, make it darker. Also, if you want to fill great background areas with something that is none too even, that is a great brush for you. Again, you can see this changing a bit from more green to more blue, so that is the color variation again that I built in. We have a soft blending brush that is wonderful for blending together two colors. So this one is really the greatest for blending because you can completely blend two colors into each other. If you use a lot of pressure, then you have this, and if you use just a little pressure, then it looks as if you're adding water. And if you have another color here, much pressure, little pressure, then it's very easy to just blend these colors together. This one is very similar, but it has a more cloudy outer edge, so you can use it to blend together two colors and have a bit of a cloudy appearance in between and on the other edges too. So let's have a look at the dark edges and liners. This one is pretty similar to other brushes on the same principles in my other sets. So this one is a sable brush. I love sable brushes in real life, and this one works on the same principle. So with a bit of pressure, you have very thin lines. With a harder pressure, you can get stronger and bolder lines. So that one really works well for detail work, hair, anything where you need to have tiny little things, dragon scales. Yeah, so anything you need in that regard. They stack, so if you want to put another layer on top of that, you will get slight water edges. This one is very similar to the last one, but has less of a texture built into it. So that is something to take into account. The next one is, I call it the Real Glaze because it's a very, very strong glazing brush. If you use it on the same layer as what you have, then it acts as a glazing brush and really works the same way that watercolor does. This one stacks like nobody's business. You can see that in this area here where the two strokes meet. So if you put several strokes on top of each other, you will end up with something very, very, very dark and saturated. So be wary of that. If you use it on a different layer, it looks a lot different, which is why on the pen here I call it same layer, so you know and don't forget it. So if you use it on another layer, then you don't have this strong glazing effect as much. That doesn't mean that you can't glaze with this on another layer, but if you want to, you have to use a darker color. And then you need to try around a bit, maybe with this. No, it's close. So you can use it on a different layer, but then you have to adjust the color a little. So this one is also a glazing brush, so it stacks, and that also means that several brush strokes over each other will get darker. Not quite as bad as the Real Glaze, but still quite pronounced. This one is nice, it has a rougher edge to it. I like to use this for backgrounds to sketches. It's got a nice texture built into it as well. It also stacks, so be careful not to put any strokes on top of each other, unless that's the look you want to go for, of course. The next one is similar, but the wash inside is a little gentler. There's not quite as much going on as with this one here, where you have a lot of darker and lighter variation. So let's get to the fun stuff. I can show you the paint and salt with something in place. Let's go with this one. I can paint in salt here. I will do that with something close to white. And then I have a very easy to control salt effect in the places where I want it. This one is fun. Let's use that with something brick colored. With this one, you can make a brick wall. It's got a lot of variation built into it. So if you press hard, it gets lighter. If you press lightly, it gets darker. And the color and the hue itself changes a bit with this color from more red to more brown or yellow. So if you need to paint a brick wall, then this is the brush for you. You can use it at different sizes for big brick walls, and very tiny brick walls. Oh, very, 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 very tiny brick walls. Okay, we're coming to the pixel level here. So you probably want to use them at this sort of size. So that one is a fun effect brush that comes in very handy at times. This one is interesting. It's an aqua pen that says press for water. So if you use it with very little pressure, you have a very even sort of paint, and if you use it with more pressure, it becomes lighter, which is something that you can use to great effect within the same space. Do not lift your Apple Pencil off the canvas while you do this, but just apply more pressure towards the end, and then you have something like a ball. Or the other way around, start with a lot of pressure and then get darker in the middle for something like one of these sea creatures whose English name escapes me right now. Jellyfish, that's it. Right, so that's something that you can do with this one. You can do it with strokes as well, or with areas when you want to start light and then get darker. Here it comes in very handy that you can stack them and then still go lighter. So that one is very versatile. So the toothbrush flick, I can't believe I never had one of those. That's what it does. Pretty much what a toothbrush flick does. So you can have very tiny toothbrush flicks. You can have very large toothbrush flicks. So whatever you like, whatever size your toothbrush, you can use it. Now we come to three of the most interesting ones. They're great for leafy backgrounds. So let's go for green, shall we? So, oh, that is very, very poisonous green. So you can use it like this. You can use different greens. So that's very, very handy for all sorts of trees and foliage. And now I'm going to show you a nifty little trick that you may know from some of my other tutorials. If you have something that is opaque, if you use a layer on top of it and set that layer to clipping mask, you can then use a more broad brush, something like this, to vary the color within the space that you have. So for example, you could do the whole thing light green now, and within this you can also have some edges like that. And now, doesn't that look absolutely like hand-painted watercolor? And you can do the same thing with these other two. So this other foliage one, we need to go back to the paint here layer. So that's a very great leafy thing all on its own. You can use it at larger sizes for bigger leaves and foliage. You can use it at very, very small sizes for tiny little shrubs if you want to. And again, for these ones, they stack a little as well, so you can go darker within these spaces. And again, if you want to use different colors, you can do that with a clipping mask, and then use this other brush again to just do this, but that's a bit boring, isn't it? So just add a few other colors. Like that. So I really find that the key to reproducing a very convincing watercolor look is achieved best, at least in the way that I work with these clipping masks. So you have something for the form in the layer below, and then you do the interesting colors in a clipping mask layer on top. Go back to InBloom. Now here we have the foliage that I just showed you. The opaque foliage is really suited excellently for exactly this sort of thing. So, something interesting will happen here. I left the top layer intact, which will color everything beneath. Right now there is nothing beneath, so nothing is colored. As soon as we paint something beneath, it will be colored immediately. So let's do that. Now that looks like magic, doesn't it? So if I turn off this one, then you see this brush here is the same really as the other foliage brush, but it's opaque, so you can stack it a lot better on top of each other and then do the interesting stuff with coloring layers like that. I can shift the layer around too to put the green where I want it, put the yellow where I want it. Yeah, so that's a lot of very interesting stuff that you can do with these clipping mask layers. You can achieve the same sort of effect, let's get rid of this one, by just doing an alpha lock that does the same thing. So now you can use another color on top of this. Let's go back to the soft blending brush again for this. And again, if you have this alpha lock layer on, you can see that the background becomes checkered and you can't paint next to it, but everything you have in place gets colored with a new color. Very, very handy thing. So it's really easy to make little trees like this for landscapes, for example. Then use a little stem. And suddenly you have very nice little trees. I sound like Bob Ross. Let's have a look at the next ones. The next three are called Text You Up, and I'm going to show you what those do by putting another rather bland background in place. First, let's use something like that. There's not much going on here, so if you want to make that more interesting, you can use Text You Up, use a slightly darker color so it'll catch, and definitely a bigger size. And then you can make some interesting stuff happen. It stacks a bit, so by going over it again, you can make these areas more pronounced. The next one works on the same principle, but does other things to the layer under it. So like this, you can see this repeating pattern again here. So we know what to do. and voila. And the last takes you up again with a different background texture, just to add some interest in otherwise bland backgrounds, for example. So we have smudging and blending brushes. Let's do something to smudge and blend for that. Let's have this bit here and this bit here, and let's blend these together. So we need to go to InBloom and we need to go to the rough blender. That's a very small size, so it doesn't look that rough. If I use it at the recommended size, you can see that there's a lot of very rough stuff going on here, looking very watercolory. The next blender is the papery blender. It adds a nice paper texture. And the next one is a texturing blender. This is all about texturing and keeping things interesting while blending and keeping stuff from becoming too smooth. So I really like this one here. The softening blender, just as it says on the tin, softens things up, but it leaves these tiny little holes in what you've got. So also adds a bit of interest to the blended spaces. The watery blender is the softest blender that I have in the set. So if you want to blend without any ado, then this one's for you. Let's go to the erasers. My fave pencil eraser is in here, as in all of my sets. It's great for gently inching close to erasing pencil lines, and so that works a bit like a kneaded eraser. The next one is very straightforward. It's a gentle line eraser. If you use a little pressure, it doesn't quite erase everything. If you use a lot of pressure, then it takes away nearly everything, but you have to go into it twice again if you want to erase everything completely. The next one is even more straightforward, is an exact eraser, and that's exactly what it says on the tin. So if you want to have exact areas removed, then this is your man. This one works very well for things you want to look like masking fluid, for example. But for anything that you want to look like masking fluid, a little trick on the side, this looks like erased and not like masking fluid and not like actual watercolor. So let's give ourselves the alpha lock here again. So we paint only what we already have. The erased lines we do not have, so the next paint will not recognize them. And then we will use something very soft like the cloudy blending brush. And when we go over these bits again with a darker color, we will have the dark appearance of color pooling the same way that it would in places where gravity pulls color in some way. So that is how you make these bits look as if these were done with real watercolor. Here as well, maybe. And then let's smudge them a little, maybe with a softening blender. And this one really looks a lot more painted than it did before. So these were all the proper brushes in this set. So let's have a look at the paper brushes. For that, we will get rid of the grunge texture. Now that looks very bland now. And let's take the soft-edged painted texture. With any of these paper brushes, what you want to do is make up another layer on top of what you did. So this is your painting layer. This is the layer we just made. We will set it to color burn. We will choose a color that is a very neutral, nearly gray, and a bit above the middle. And if we now paint above this, the texture appears. It also darkens everything below, so be careful with that. So with the texture, without, with, without. Let's try them all. That was the soft-edged painted texture. That is very similar to that one. With the texture, without. So it adds a bit of interest again to your spaces. The next one is more traditionally a paper texture in the background. So this one has a nuageux texture from very cloudy looking watercolor paper. These stack, so the more dramatic you want your paper to be, the more often you can get over it. So you can see that did a lot for this one. And the next one is torchon, which is also a very cloudy paper. And the next one is my favorite Canson Héritage. And the last one is also Canson Héritage, but with a bit of a fuzzier outline in case you want to use it in certain places only. And there you have a nice papery structure to everything. So that is the InBloom set. And now let's have a look at Drop and Bloom, which also comes within the set. Drop and Bloom has a lot of very, very nice textures that I made by sloshing around with a lot of water one very rainy afternoon. So let's have a look at what these do. I am going to go into this one again for a second and give us again a very boring looking background that we can then make a little more interesting. Come on. Ah, that's what happens when you try to paint on an alpha lock layer that is locked, by the way, so you need to unlock it. Let's go for something orangey. You can see that my grunge texture is switched off. Let's switch that back on so it already looks a lot more interesting. And then let's go into the drop and bloom. Alcohol drops. Let's do that a bit lighter. So it's a good idea to use the drop and bloom brushes on a lighter background. So I will do that here. Let's go to another layer, but a normal one this time. So just set it to normal. So the alcohol drops. A little more dark. And here's what they do. That really looks like you spattered some alcohol into that one. You see the repeating pattern again, and you know what we can do about that, which is this. And these are some of the textures that lend themselves to this workaround really well. So if you look at this one, you can't tell that there's any sort of repeating pattern at work here. Alcohol drops too, because I love the alcohol drops just so much. These ones are a bit larger, and you already see repeating pattern. So quick workaround. And there we have a nice little pattern. If you want to have it even bigger, just make it bigger. So a lot of things can be done with this sort of thing. The next one is alcohol drops layering. That is the same brush as the previous, but it has less contrast to it. So it really works well with the layer below it, and you can then put down these very, very faint layers. Again, repeating pattern, so do the thing. This one is a soft bloomy texture. Let's have a look at that. This one repeats very strongly, so we can avoid that. The next one is one of the ones that I was missing most, and one of the main reasons why I did this set in the first place. And that's this one. So that is exactly what happens when you drop generous amounts of water into still wet paint. It's quite large, so you only get the repeats after a while, but you get them, but you already know how to avoid them. I don't have to show you each time. So, and the next one is the same principle again, but really only paints on these blotches and leaves the background intact. So you can have it on a more or less white background or on the orangish one that we have. Again, repeating pattern, but no problem for us. The next one is a very nice blotchy wash. Very soft blotches that you can add as backgrounds. Then we have wet drops. And the wet drops as layering, again with just a bit of blotchiness around, very little. Okay, the next ones need a bit of practice probably before you can use them. The blooming edge is easy to use on its own. You can just drop these things in there. You can make these really huge, and you can do it like this. You have to slide it in from the side. Make your canvas really small. Start here. Don't raise your Apple pencil, and then slide it in. And then you have a huge sort of blotch. Sometimes it doesn't catch. I don't know why. But that is something that you can do with all of these. So this one is something that you can just drop in here. But if you want to have a bigger one, slide it in from the side. And the same with the blooming edge number 2. I think we need to have this a bit darker. So now we have these edges right there. This one is very nice. If you use it with a light color like white, you can drop in random blotches. Looks very close to dropping random water into wet paint. Even does this pushing out pigment just a little. And if you want to have it slightly less chaotic and more controlled, you have this one, which is very, very similar, but closer to where you put your Apple pencil, so it's easy to control what you're doing. But these two brushes are very similar again, but you will have to decide which one you like most in what circumstances. This one is fun. That's the very fuzzy caterpillar. You can use it as white. And it looks a bit like water dropped and then these tendrils going into the paint. You can use it really well as a smudge tool, with a smudge tool. But definitely on the same layer then. So you get these tendrils. Again, very watercolory. Let's make one layer of this, shall we? See. And you can even use it with the eraser tool. And erase some caterpillary things, which then look like water dropped into wet paint. And we have another blending tool with this one. That's the blotchy blender. Also leaves very nice and interesting texture where you use it. So you will have noticed that this set here, Drop and Bloom, is not like my other sets, which is why it comes with the InBloom set. The InBloom set is a complete set from sketching and inking to paper, erasers and everything. Drop and Bloom is really just fun stuff, but I wanted to have all these bloom things in one place. So when I want to add bloom, I know what set to use and where to go, and where to just get the stuff that makes my otherwise rather bland background more interesting. Like this, for example. So I hope that this was helpful as always, and I hope that you will have lots of fun with my brushes. Thanks for watching.